President Trump is issuing an ominous warning ahead of a ruling that will determine whether he overstepped his authority in imposing tariffs. Trump argued in part of a longer social media post yesterday that if the courts strike down his tariff policy, quote, it would be impossible to ever recover or pay back those massive sums of money and honor. It would be 1929 all over again, a Great Depression, he wrote. The president also took credit for the recent record stock market run, saying it was due to his tariffs, although experts dispute that claim. Let's discuss all of this and more with Lydia DePillis. She covers the economy for the New York Times. Lydia, thank you so much for joining us. The administration just rolled out some of the steepest tariffs in modern U.S. history, in some cases 50% or more. Will history look at this as a small trade fight or major rewrite of how global trade works? How significant is this?
Okay, so something extraordinary just happened at the Supreme Court, and it could reshape the presidency itself. Justices from both the conservative and liberal wings of the court spent hours absolutely grilling the Trump administration's lawyers over whether the president has the power to impose sweeping tariffs using emergency declarations. And based on what happened in that courtroom, based on the questions that were asked and the skepticism that was expressed, legal analysts are warning that Trump is heading for a devastating defeat. Not just a loss on the tariffs themselves, but a ruling that could sharply limit presidential power for decades to come. The White House is scrambling. Businesses are worried, and prediction markets have slashed Trump's odds of winning this case to barely 30%. This is one of the biggest constitutional confrontations we have seen in years, and the outcome could fundamentally change what presidents can and cannot do. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
This is a major escalation of tariffs. It's across the board, across the entire world on most goods, although there are large exceptions which make those tariffs look a little bit bigger than they actually are in practice. But it is a reordering of global trade if they do stay in place. Now, you noted that there is a major court case underway that has to do with the legality of this type of tariff that President Trump has imposed on most countries. As he noted, you mentioned some foreshadowing there. If his authority to impose these particular tariffs on national security emergency grounds is overruled, he would have to take off the largest and steepest of those, at least the most sweeping ones. There are certain sectoral tariffs that he still has the authority to do.
Let me explain exactly what is at stake here, because this is not just some technical legal dispute about trade policy. Trump has made tariffs the centerpiece of his economic strategy. He has imposed massive import taxes on goods from China and other countries, claiming he has the authority to do so under emergency power statutes. He says trade deficits are country killers. He says America needs to protect itself from unfair foreign competition. And he has used tariffs as leverage in international negotiations, threatening higher taxes on imports unless other countries give him what he wants. The entire Trump trade strategy depends on his ability to impose these tariffs unilaterally without going to Congress. Without that power, his whole economic approach falls apart. And now the Supreme Court is questioning whether he ever had that power in the first place. The hearing was brutal for the administration. Justice after justice expressed serious doubts about whether Congress ever authorized such sweeping tariff powers. And these were not just liberal justices attacking a Republican president. Conservative justices, including justices Trump himself appointed, were among the most skeptical. Justice Gorsuch, a Trump appointee, specifically warned about the gradual, continual accumulation of power within the executive branch away from the people's elected representatives in Congress. That is not the kind of language you hear from a justice who is planning to rule for the administration. That is the language of someone who sees a constitutional problem that needs to be corrected immediately. Justice Barrett, another Trump appointee, also raised serious concerns. She questioned whether the statutes Trump is relying on actually authorize what he is doing. She pushed back on the administration's legal theories. She seemed unconvinced by the arguments being made. When justices you appointed are publicly expressing skepticism about your legal position during oral arguments, that is a very bad sign for your case. That suggests the votes are simply not there to uphold what Trump has been doing. The administration's lawyer tried to defend Trump's authority but struggled under the questioning. The justices kept coming back to the same basic point. Did Congress actually give the president this power? Or has the executive branch claimed an authority that was never intended? The Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. That is explicit in Article 1. For the president to impose tariffs, he needs statutory authority from Congress. And the justices seemed genuinely uncertain whether that authority exists for what Trump is doing. They wanted to see it in the text, and the administration could not show them where it was. Analysts and legal experts who watch the arguments are now warning that a loss would be devastating for Trump's economic strategy. The tariffs affect billions of dollars in trade. They are central to Trump's leverage with China and other rivals. If the court strikes them down or significantly limits presidential tariff authority, the entire Trump trade agenda collapses. Businesses that have been planning around these tariffs would face sudden uncertainty. International negotiations would be thrown into chaos, and Trump would lose one of the most powerful tools he has claimed for advancing his America First agenda. Trump himself seems to recognize how serious this is. He declared that a loss would be devastating for our country. He doubled down on his claims about trade deficits being country killers. But that kind of rhetoric does not persuade Supreme Court justices. They are looking at the Constitution and the statutes and asking whether the president has the legal authority to do what he is doing. And based on the oral arguments, based on the skepticism expressed by justices across the ideological spectrum, the answer appears to be no. Traders in political prediction markets have taken notice. Before the oral arguments, there was significant uncertainty about how the court would rule. Now those same traders are giving Trump barely a 30% chance of prevailing. The smart money thinks he is going to lose. And when he loses, if he loses, the implications go far beyond tariffs. A ruling against Trump could set precedents limiting executive power across multiple domains. Future presidents would face new constraints. The balance of power between Congress and the White House would shift significantly in ways that could last for generations. So, in this video, we are going to break down exactly what happened at the Supreme Court and why it signals such trouble for Trump. We are going to look at the specific concerns raised by justices, including Trump's own appointees. We are going to examine what a defeat would mean for the tariffs and for presidential power more broadly. And we are going to talk about the political implications, because with the economic agenda at stake, this ruling could shape everything that happens going forward. Let us get into it. All right, so let us really dig into what happened at the Supreme Court, because the oral arguments reveal just how much trouble the administration is in. When you listen to what the justices said, when you analyze the questions they asked, you see a court that is deeply skeptical of Trump's tariff authority and potentially ready to impose significant limits on presidential power. This was not a friendly hearing for the administration by any measure. The case centers on whether Trump has the legal authority to impose sweeping tariffs using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEEPA. This is a statute Congress passed in 1977 that gives the president certain powers to respond to national emergencies involving foreign threats. Trump has been using IEPA to justify massive tariffs on imports, claiming that trade deficits and unfair trade practices constitute emergencies that threaten national security. The problem is that EPA was not designed for this. It was created to deal with actual emergencies, terrorist financing, sanctions against rogue nations, responses to international crises. The idea that it authorizes a wholesale remaking of American trade policy through unilateral presidential tariffs is, to put it mildly, a stretch. And the justices made clear during oral arguments that they are not buying it. They pushed back hard on the administration's interpretation of what this statute allows. Justice Gorsuch's questioning was particularly pointed. He raised fundamental concerns about separation of powers, the constitutional principle that different branches of government have different roles. Congress makes the laws, the president executes them, the courts interpret them. When power accumulates too much in one branch, particularly the executive, that threatens the constitutional balance. And Gorsuch specifically warned about what he called the gradual continual accumulation of power within the executive branch away from the people's elected representatives in Congress. That language is significant. Gorsuch was not just questioning whether IEPA authorizes tariffs. He was raising broader concerns about executive overreach, about presidents claiming powers that Congress never gave them. He was signaling that he sees this case as part of a larger pattern where the executive branch has been grabbing authority that properly belongs to the legislature. And he seemed inclined to push back against that pattern in a meaningful and lasting way. This is a justice who cares deeply about these structural constitutional questions. Justice Barrett's questioning followed similar themes. She pressed the administration's lawyer on the text of the statute. She asked whether IEPA actually says what the administration claims it says. She seemed unconvinced by the arguments that Congress intended to give the president such sweeping authority over trade policy. When a justice asks pointed questions about statutory interpretation and seems skeptical of your answers, that is not a good sign for your case. Barrett was clearly troubled by the breadth of what the administration was claiming. The liberal justices were, of course, also skeptical. But what makes this hearing so significant is the conservative skepticism. Trump appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court: Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. He reshaped the court to have a 6-3 conservative majority. If anyone might be inclined to support Trump's legal positions, you would expect it to be the justices he put there. Instead, they are raising serious doubts. They are questioning his authority. They are expressing concerns about executive overreach. That is remarkable given everything Trump did to reshape this court in his image. This reflects a genuine intellectual divide within conservatism. There are conservatives who believe in strong executive power, the so-called unitary executive theory that the president should have broad authority over the executive branch. But there are also conservatives who believe in limited government and separation of powers, who worry about any branch accumulating too much authority. Gorsuch, in particular, has been associated with this latter camp. He has expressed skepticism about the administrative state and about executive agencies claiming powers that Congress did not clearly grant. The tariff case fits squarely into that framework. It is exactly the kind of executive overreach that Gorsuch has built his judicial philosophy around constraining. The administration's lawyer did his best to defend Trump's position, but faced relentless questioning from all sides. He tried to argue that IEEPA gives the president broad discretion to respond to emergencies. He tried to argue that trade imbalances constitute genuine threats to national security. He tried to point to the history of presidential action on trade, but the justices kept pushing back. They kept asking where in the statute it says the president can impose tariffs. They kept questioning whether what Trump is doing is really within the scope of what Congress authorized. The lawyers struggled to provide satisfying answers. Legal analysts who watched the arguments came away with a clear impression: the administration is in serious trouble. Major outlets including Forbes, Politico, and CNN all reported that Trump appeared headed for a significant loss. The consensus among court watchers is that at least 5 and possibly 6 or more justices are skeptical of the administration's position. That would be enough for a decisive ruling against Trump, potentially even a lopsided defeat that would be hard to spin politically. Some analysts are predicting a ruling that goes 7-2 or even 8-1 against the administration. And the implications of such a ruling would be enormous. If the court finds that IEEPA does not authorize these tariffs, the tariffs would have to be lifted. Billions of dollars in trade would be affected. Companies that have been paying tariffs might seek refunds for what they have already paid. The entire structure of Trump's trade policy would collapse overnight. International trading partners would immediately recalculate their positions, knowing that Trump's leverage has been dramatically reduced. Countries that have been negotiating under pressure from tariff threats would suddenly have much less reason to make concessions. But beyond the immediate impact on tariffs, there are broader implications for presidential power. If the court rules that the president cannot use emergency powers to fundamentally reshape trade policy, that reasoning could apply to other areas too. Presidents have increasingly relied on emergency declarations to take actions that Congress would not authorize through normal legislation. A ruling that limits this practice could constrain executive authority across multiple domains. Future presidents of both parties would face new limits on what they can do unilaterally without congressional approval. Trump himself recognizes the stakes. He has called a potential loss devastating for the country. He has doubled down on his claims about trade deficits being country killers. But that rhetoric is aimed at his political base, not at the Supreme Court. The justices are not going to rule based on Trump's campaign talking points. They are going to rule based on the Constitution and the statutes and whether the president has the legal authority to do what he is doing. And based on everything we saw in the oral arguments, that answer appears to be pointing firmly toward no. Okay, so let us break this down into what you really need to understand about this Supreme Court case and what it means for Trump and for presidential power more broadly. Because this is one of those cases that could genuinely reshape how the American government operates for decades to come. The stakes here go far beyond any single policy. First point, the oral arguments went badly for Trump across ideological lines. This was not a case where liberal justices attacked the administration while conservatives defended it. Justices from both wings of the court expressed serious skepticism. Gorsuch and Barrett, both Trump appointees, raised pointed concerns about executive overreach and whether Congress actually authorized these tariffs. When your own appointees are questioning your legal authority in open court, that is a devastating signal about where the case is headed. That tells you the votes are probably not there for the administration. You do not see that kind of skepticism from friendly justices unless they have real problems with your legal position. Second point, the core constitutional issue is separation of powers. The Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. For the president to impose tariffs, he needs statutory authority from Congress. Trump is claiming that IEEPA provides that authority, but the justices seem unconvinced. They are asking whether Congress really intended to delegate such sweeping power over trade policy to the executive branch, and they seem inclined to say no. Congress did not authorize this, and the president cannot do it without proper authorization from the legislative branch. This is fundamental constitutional structure we are talking about. Third point. Prediction markets now give Trump only a 30% chance of winning. These markets aggregate the judgments of traders who are putting real money on the outcome. They are not partisan. They are trying to predict what will actually happen because they have money on the line. And those traders have concluded that Trump is probably going to lose. That assessment is based on watching the oral arguments and analyzing the justices' questions. The smart money thinks the court is going to rule against the administration. When people with financial stakes reach that conclusion, it tells you something important. Fourth point. A loss would be devastating for Trump's economic strategy. The tariffs are not just policy preferences, they are central to Trump's entire approach to trade and international relations. He uses tariffs as leverage with China and other countries. He uses them to pressure trading partners into making concessions. He uses them as a centerpiece of his America First messaging. If the court strikes them down or significantly limits his authority, the whole strategy collapses. Trump loses his biggest economic weapon at exactly the moment he needs it most. His negotiating leverage disappears overnight. Fifth point, the ruling could limit presidential power for decades. This is not just about Trump. Whatever the court decides will set precedents that apply to future presidents of both parties. If the court rules that presidents cannot use emergency powers to impose sweeping tariffs, that reasoning could extend to other areas where executives have claimed emergency authority. Future presidents might face new constraints on unilateral action. The balance of power between Congress and the White House could shift significantly toward Congress. This ruling could echo through constitutional law for generations to come. Sixth point. This fits into a broader pattern of judicial pushback against executive overreach. We have seen the court strike down other assertions of presidential authority in recent years. Student loan forgiveness programs, vaccine mandates, administrative agency actions. There is a thread running through these cases: skepticism about executive power, claims that are not clearly authorized by Congress. The tariff case fits that pattern perfectly. And if the court rules against Trump, it will reinforce a judicial approach that constrains presidential unilateralism across the board. The executive branch will face tighter limits going forward. So where does this leave us? Waiting for a ruling that could come in the next few months. The court has heard the arguments. The justices will deliberate behind closed doors. They will write opinions. And then they will announce their decision, probably sometime before the end of the term. Based on the oral arguments, that decision appears likely to go against Trump, but nothing is certain until the ruling is actually issued. Courts can surprise us. Justices can change their minds during deliberations. We will not know for sure until the opinion comes down. The political implications are significant regardless of the legal outcome. Trump has staked a lot on his tariff policy. He has made it central to his economic message. He has claimed it as evidence of his willingness to fight for American workers and businesses against foreign competition. If the Supreme Court, including justices he appointed, strikes down his tariffs as unauthorized by law, that is a massive political embarrassment. It undercuts his claims of strength and effectiveness. It shows that even his own appointees will not rubber stamp his exercise of power just because he put them on the court. And businesses are watching closely. Companies have been making decisions based on the tariff regime: where to source products, how to price goods, whether to move manufacturing. Uncertainty about whether the tariffs will survive creates problems for planning, and if the tariffs are struck down suddenly, companies will have to rapidly adjust their entire operations. Supply chains could be disrupted, prices could change dramatically. The economic ripple effects of a Supreme Court ruling could be substantial and felt across the entire American economy and beyond. For Trump supporters, this case presents an uncomfortable reality. The Supreme Court that Trump reshaped, the court with 3 of his appointees, appears ready to hand him a significant defeat. That was not supposed to happen. Trump was supposed to have created a friendly court that would support his agenda and uphold his exercise of power. Instead, he is facing justices who are asking hard questions about constitutional limits and separation of powers. The conservative legal movement that produced these justices is not simply a Trump support operation. It has genuine principles about limited government and congressional authority that can cut against Trump when he overreaches. The hearing revealed something important about the limits of presidential power in our system. Presidents can claim authority. They can assert emergency powers. They can take unilateral action. But ultimately, the courts get to decide whether those actions are legal. And when justices, including conservative justices, look at what a president is doing and conclude it exceeds constitutional authority, they will say so. That is how the system is supposed to work. That is checks and balances in action. That is the Constitution doing its job of preventing any one branch from accumulating too much power. I will be back with more updates when the court issues its ruling, because whatever they decide will be major news with significant implications for trade policy and for the constitutional balance between the branches of government. This could be one of the most consequential Supreme Court decisions in years. The outcome will affect not just Trump, but every future president who tries to exercise unilateral economic power. Stay tuned.